If you're from Bradford, you recognize this building. Right now it's called Beefeaters, and it's a restaurant on the corner of Congress Street and East Cordon Street. But it wasn't always a restaurant. And some may recognize this building as the Carnegie Public Library. It was built in 1901, and many of us have fond memories of going to that library and taking out books and doing research. But it wasn't always a library either. If you had been around, say, 138 years ago, this is the building that you would have seen. It's actually Bradford's first city hall, built in 1883. And the funny thing about this building is it burned in 1894, just like the one that's going to replace it in 1898. It's our first city hall. Were we lucky or what to have two burn in a row? Who knows? Today we're going to tell the story of the burning of this city hall. It's an interesting one, so stay tuned to this edition of Coffee with the Curator. Here's a photograph of the same building, and I've highlighted the little building behind it. It's the Herbig Bakery, now the Bradford Landmark Society's headquarters at 45 East Cordon Street. We've been there since 1879, and City Hall was built in 1883. Why did we need a City Hall anyway? Well, City Council had been meeting above a building on Pine Street, but everyone agreed the time had come to build an impressive structure that showed that Bradford had come of age. We'd recently been incorporated. Debate went on for months. Then, May of that year, they set the bids out. They required that the building be made of brick. And on June 7th, they opened up the bids. James Wilson and J.W. Hayes' bid was for $9,800. George Stewart was for $9,500, and Jones, Dennis, and Booth bid was $10,400. Needless to say, City Council went with the middle bid of George Stewart. He actually was pretty well known in the city, and George Stewart had built a lot of things, so they knew his work would be reputable. They began digging the excavation by the end of June, and if you wanted to, you could have some of the dirt if you would come haul it away yourself. By the end of July, the brick walls were going up. And on September 23rd, the Bradford Era reported, "The new city building is receiving the finishing touches, and the furniture will soon be put in as the structure is received from by the councils from the contractor George Stewart. The city officials will be comfortably installed, and the building, although unpretentious, will no doubt fill every requirement." The new city hall opened for business at the end of September. The mayor's office was located on the first office on the left, and city treasurer the first office on the right. Upstairs was where city council met. Johnson Hose Fire Company was on the second floor in the rear, and the Ear Hook and Ladder was also in the rear on the first floor. The jail was also on the first floor. True, it was unpretentious, but the city was happy with their new city hall. And then, just 11 years later, disaster struck. Now, here's a photograph from the Sanborn insurance map of 1886. This is about 3 years after the building was completed. And you can see the hose house, the hook and ladder, the city offices. It's a two-story building. But what's interesting about this building, and what will prove its demise, is it's a brick veneer. It's not solid brick. And when the fire started, it created a natural chimney. The fire went right up through the middle and destroyed the building. I'm going to read you a description of the fire. This is what was printed in the Bradford Era on June 15th of 1894. The headlines read, "City Hall a ruin. An early morning fire that refused to be controlled. The fire alarm would not work, and the Seagrave truck that we have not got wouldn't provide ladders to reach the roof, and there was no insurance." It begins, "The fire was discovered in the bunk room of the Johnson Hose Company about 3 o'clock this morning. An alarm was turned in and was promptly responded to by several companies. The fire soon spread to the adjoining rooms and burst out of the top of the building. The structure being brick veneered, it was extremely difficult for the firemen to fight the blaze. The building is 2 stories in height and was occupied by the Johnson Hose Company, Ear Hook and Ladder Company, council chambers, the lockup, and the offices of the mayor, city clerk, city engineer, city treasurer, city solicitor, etc. The upper portion of the building was completely gutted, and the whole structure was flooded with water. The loss is estimated between $6,000 to $8,000. Chief Stanton was in his office when the fire was discovered, and he ran out to box 13 to set in an alarm. Now, this is a box that's across the street. The box refused to work, and to call assistance, he fired his gun 4 times into the air. This summoned officers from their beats, and one of them repaired to the Riddle House, now that's all the way down the street, and sent to a general alarm from that box. All of this meant delay, so that when the hose companies reached the scene, the fire had been given time to get a good headway in the inflammable structure. The city hall was well adapted to encourage a fire, and 6 years ago met with a similar experience. From the tower of the hose house, it speedily spread through the framework of the wooden structure, and when the firemen were ready to work, they had a serious task. From the first, the hose companies labored under a disadvantage. The brick veneering of the structure and its cornice made a beautiful breastwork to shield the fire, and the lack of ladders to scale the roof and attack the flames from an accessible place put the framework of the roof at the mercy of the fire. Water was poured on the roof and ceilings to the best advantage possible, but the affair was taken by all the spectators as a gigantic and expensive object lesson, showing the value of a good set of ladders. 2 prisoners were in the lockup at the time the fire broke out, and I quote, "They were a crazy Italian and a common drunk." Both were released for the want of something else to do with them. The records from most of the offices were removed in more or less damaged condition from water, disarrangement, and loss. By the time the fire was checked, the inside of the building was pretty thoroughly gutted, particularly in the roof and the upper portion. The lower floor was so submerged that it suffered only from water. The high rates of insurance had kept the building uninsured. The investigation that followed found the fire had been due to a faulty gas jet in the Johnson Hose Company quarters. People living in close proximity to the building reported that shortly before the alarm was given, a loud explosion was heard, and a few moments later, a sheet of flame was seen issuing from the hose tower, which was at least 50 feet high. After the burned remains were cleared away, the lot remained empty for nearly 6 years. The city owned the lot and at one time even considered building the fire station there. Eventually, however, the lot was given for a token sum to the Carnegie Library, which constructed Bradford's first library building there in 1901. Luckier than its predecessor, that building still stands, and luckier still, the Her Big Bakery survived as well. But once again, Bradford was without a city hall. It would be 4 more years before another city hall was erected, this time on the corner of Kennedy and Boylston Streets, and that one will burn in 1901. But that city hall would never have been built if the first city hall here on the corner of Congress and East Gordon Street had not burned to the ground during those early, exciting hours of June 1894.